You are all a lost generation. That's from the author Gertrude Stein, and it's at the beginning of one of my favorite books, The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, published 99 years ago this year. The sentiment is old, but I think many of us today feel like we're a bit of a lost generation, don't we? Generation Z is more likely to report having poor mental health than older generations. We face an environment where the pathway we were sold for middle-class stability, a college education, and home ownership is becoming more expensive and out of reach. Many of us struggle with hopelessness, aimlessness, and angst about our place in a world where more and more spheres of life are sucked into the slop-filled online world, online jobs, online friends, online dating. Everything is vying for all of your attention all the time. Politics also basically sucks. It feels nonsensical, unresponsive, and ruled by people who feel woefully out of touch with the modern world. We feel lost. It's not the same kind of lost that the original lost generation felt, having to cope with the aftermath of World War I, but we feel lost all the same. One of my favorite things about reading the writing of older thinkers is it gives you a kind of perspective on the human experience, what's new and what's more universal. So today I'm going to talk about why people my age feel lost through the lens of some famous authors who I think also have something to say about feeling lost. Let's start with the economy. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning, so we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. Of course, that's from F. Scott Fitzgerald's classic, The Great Gatsby, chock full of meaning about what makes people happy, the American dream, all that stuff. But let me translate that into more modern terms for you. Hustle and grind until you die. Where does this kind of mindset come from? I won't pretend I'm going to be able to explain the whole thing. There's a lot going on there. But I wonder if we can't explain at least some of the relationship of this generation to the economy with this graph. This graph shows what's gotten more and less expensive in this country since we were young. Take a look at what's become between 50 and 100% cheaper, technology and toys, compared to what's become at least that much more expensive, education, medical care, housing, and food. We live in a world of unparalleled prosperity. I'm not denying that. We have instant access to more information, entertainment, and people now than anyone, even 100 years ago, could possibly dream of. At the same time, though, most of us were, be it through school or through our parents or just through cultural osmosis, placed on a path to middle-class stability that requires going to college and owning your own home. And that path is becoming much more treacherous. It's more expensive than it used to be. I want to talk about college first. It used to be possible to work your way through college with minimal or even no debt. This would be very difficult today. This isn't going to turn into one of those don't go to college, take my course, and learn how to crypto scam kids videos, though. Of course, you can make it without going to college. You can also get some other kind of advanced training, but going to college, not even talking about the non-monetary considerations here, is still a good investment for the majority of people, just looking at the data. But it's undeniable that this investment is a lot less attractive than it used to be. The median person in the United States with student loans is in somewhere around $20,000 worth of debt. That's a pretty heavy load to bear when you're just coming out of college, especially now that the new administration is going to restart collections on those.
Garnishing things like their tax refunds, federal salaries, Social Security benefits. The Education Department says more than 5 million borrowers are in default.
That kind of debt can require you to readjust your life choices, not just how you budget and what you do for fun, but also bigger things like where you live, relationships, marriage, kids, buying a house even. Buying a house is a big one. A house is the most expensive thing that most people will ever buy, and people depend on the wealth stored in the value of their house. Which presents us with another big source of the economic stress this generation faces, the fact that owning a home or even renting an apartment in one of the cities where all the economic opportunity is in this country is becoming harder and harder to do. But why is this happening, and what can we do about it? First, let me ask you a question. Why is it that houses appreciate in value over time, while cars lose value the moment you drive them off the lot? It's not so obvious. Both cars and houses are made of materials that degrade over time. They both get wear and tear. They both may become less attractive to potential buyers over time because of shifting stylistic preferences. So why is it that cars depreciate so dramatically while housing appreciates? The first step to understanding why housing is so expensive in this country is to understand that generally, housing is not actually what's expensive in this country. What's expensive is the land under the housing. It's the location. When you see those memes about boomers buying a house for 2 nickels in San Francisco when they were 20 and selling it today for $2 million, it's not because the value of the actual structure itself has increased that entire amount. It's because the San Francisco area is one of the wealthiest areas in the world, and a lot more people want to live there today than they did when those boomers bought that house. The right to own a house at that location is what's gotten more expensive. Before the invention of highways and suburbs, when the distance you could afford to live from your job was horse or walking distance, we had a very similar problem to the one we're facing today, actually. Back in the days when San Francisco was a boomtown and New York City was the go-to example of urban dysfunction, a writer named Henry George had this to say about the situation. It is in the older and richer sections of the Union that pauperism and distress among the working classes are becoming most painfully apparent. If there is less deep poverty in San Francisco than in New York, is it not because San Francisco is yet behind New York in all that both cities are striving for? When San Francisco reaches the point where New York is now, who can doubt that there will also be ragged and barefooted children on her streets? At that time, when San Francisco was still rapidly growing and New York was already a big city, settlers wanted to move out west where there was still cheap land in good locations because that had become out of reach in New York and other eastern cities. You can probably already start to see the problem here. Getting in early and buying land is a great way to build wealth, but that wealth comes from the fact that the land is in a high demand location, and high demand locations are finite. Not everybody can have one. The wealth is built on there being an increasing number of people willing to pay more and more for access to the privilege of having a house or an apartment or a business or a factory or a warehouse or really anything in a particular location. Really, this problem goes way beyond just housing, and it would be a mistake to lay this at the feet of regular family homeowners who are just trying to make it. 100 years ago, this cycle of newcomers building wealth by owning land in a particular location could only repeat a few times before bumping up against the reality of how poor transportation technology was at the time. The invention of highways and suburbs bought us a few more decades because it, in effect, unlocked a whole bunch of new, cheap land that this cycle could be repeated on. What's happening now that we've sprawled for a few decades, though? In California, the people who got there first got rich. San Francisco is one of the richest places in the world, and despite that, Google programmers can't always afford to live alone, and the less fortunate sleep on the streets. San Francisco has reached the position that New York was in 100 years ago. So people move out of California just like they moved to California to do this all over again somewhere else. It's a structural problem. We can probably buy ourselves a couple more decades by allowing housing to be built more densely. In a ton of this country, the only thing that can be built legally is single-family housing, which is ridiculous. But this will not solve the problem. The problem is that speculating on land is a great way to make money, and that the appreciation of land value is in great measure dependent on new generations buying their way into a system where the profitability of the early and lucky is propped up by the desperation of the unlucky and late. Housing sucks for Generation Z because we were just born too late to get in early on the most profitable waves of suburban sprawl, and cities have limited new housing construction so much that if you want to rent, landlords have all the leverage in the world to squeeze you for every last dime. I feel like this sounds conspiracy brain, but it really isn't. It's basic supply and demand stuff. The good news here is that probably more than anything else I talk about in this video, this is a policy issue, and that means there are policies we can change to help fix it. Shifting taxes away from productive activity done by individuals onto the value of land, which is something generated collectively by all of us, would be a great step in the right direction towards breaking this cycle. I'll probably make a full video on land value taxation one day, so let me know if you're interested in hearing about that in a comment. Land value tax and just allowing more housing to be built where people actually want to live would go a long way towards fixing this particular issue. We are in great haste to construct a magnetic telegraph from Maine to Texas, but Maine and Texas, it may be, have nothing important to communicate, as if the main object were to talk fast and not talk sensibly. We are eager to tunnel under the Atlantic and bring the old world some weeks nearer to the new, but perchance the first news that will leak through into the broad, flapping American ear will be that Princess Adelaide has the whooping cough. That's from Henry David Thoreau's Walden in 1854. Today, every moment from when you get out of bed to the moment you go to sleep, maybe even while you sleep, if you're using one of those sleep tracker things, you are, to some degree, online. I recognize the irony of talking about this in a YouTube video, but everything is online now, and that sucks. Or really, I should say, everything is online now, and it sucks because what's really happened is we've just replaced significant parts of the human experience with an online version that's just worse than the original. This is a trend that's only been going one way for our entire lives, but it really got cemented, I think, when we all got shoved a few more degrees online pretty abruptly by COVID. Online friends, I think, are a good example here. When I talk about friends online, I do not mean people who like mutually follow each other on social media, but otherwise do not interact. This is not friendship. I'm drawing a line here definitively. This is two people developing a mutually parasocial relationship with the other. It's two people taking turns using a telescope to watch the other through a window. If the only interaction you have with someone is seeing their posts, even if they also see your posts, that is not your friend. When I'm talking about online friends, I'm talking about a relationship consisting of actual back and forth communication that stays entirely or primarily on a social media app. This is where things get a little tougher. I've developed great relationships with normal, well-adjusted people online. It's super fun to chat with people who you otherwise would have never had a chance to meet or interact with. If you're into something or want to talk to people about something and there's nobody in your area that can fulfill that need, online friends and communities can be fantastic, absolutely. I'm part of some online communities that would be absolutely irreplaceable in real life. And so I want you to bear all this in mind for the duration of what I'm about to say. And that is, there are some problems with spending too much time with online friends. First, and I think most obviously, is the fact that we are physical beings. We exist in physical space. I think there are genuine human needs for social interaction that cannot be met by online relationships. The tone of voice, the body language, the three-dimensionality of it all, I just don't think that comes across online. And I think that's a whole kind of communication that's just missing on the internet. Second is the fact that online friendships are filtered through and managed by third-party platforms that have their own goals. If a platform goes out of business or goes public and decides you can only send 100 messages a day without a fee, or changes its algorithm or changes its rules or whatever, your online friendship could be instantly vaporized. Online friendships are subject by their nature to the capricious and opaque desires of platforms. And this is worse than real life, in my opinion. The third thing, and the thing that a lot of you probably expected me to say first, is that online communities can also be incredibly awful. Anyone who's been on Discord for long enough can tell you that these places can be totally unrepresentative of real life. I think this is a product of pseudo-anonymity, online communities attracting a certain kind of person who just spends their entire life in online communities, and the flaws inherent to online communication generally. The bounds of acceptable behavior in a Discord channel are way off what they are in real life. I've seen, as I'm sure many of you have seen, the results of someone just stewing in these online communities full of other people who are also just constantly stewing in these online communities. Their ability to have normal, real-life conversations and relationships can start to be impacted. I think all this can be avoided both by having regular contact with real-life friends and having real relationships in the real world, and by having high standards for the online communities you join. Be clear-eyed about what you would think of the people you're hanging out with online if they were acting the way they act online in real life. Dating is also online now. Who truly enjoys online dating? It really is just dating, but with all the worst parts turned up to the max. People are more superficial. People are creepy and weird behind the pseudo-anonymity that comes with being just one profile among countless other profiles. And like with online friends, the whole thing is facilitated and filtered through a platform that isn't interested in creating good relationships as much as it's interested in getting you to buy boosts or more swipes, or access to the people that the algorithm thinks that you're the most interested in. There's also the fact that, and I actually want to preface this by saying that sometimes I think that competition framing around dating can be a little weird and distorting to reality. That in real life, if you're at a bar or something, you're competing with the people at the bar. On a dating app, you're basically competing with everyone in your city without the benefit of being able to have a personality like you can in person. It gets pretty crazy. How many times have you seen people say things like, oh, you should hold a dog in your first photo, or make sure that you're the best looking person in a group picture, or something like that? That's cool, right? If it works, it works. People do what they have to do. But it's also literally insane that we're applying Mr. Beast thumbnail logic to our dating profiles in the hopes that our future spouses or whatever will be 30% less likely to swipe away. This has got to be like damaging to the soul in some way. I don't know. It's really awful though, but it's becoming so normalized that I worry that sometimes people think it's abnormal or weird or something to meet people any other way. I don't normally give this kind of advice, but if you're a young person and having trouble on dating apps, this mentality is just absolute death. It might look or feel relatively true in your friend circle, but it really is not. It does require facing the possibility of rejection in person instead of a million tiny rejections that you can't see while you're online, which can be scary. But don't be weird about it, and you will be both a better person and contribute to the construction of a better and less online world than the one that we currently live in. Speaking of building a better world, though, men of my generation have had Spain in our hearts. It was there that they learned that one can be right and yet be beaten, that force can vanquish spirit, and that there are times when courage is not rewarded. That's a quote from Camus, a famous author that I've noticed is really popular with this generation, talking about the disillusionment that many people of his generation, particularly people on the left, like Camus was, felt after the victory of Francisco Franco and the fascists in their revolt against the Spanish Republic. It's a bleak quote, but it was a pretty bleak time in political history. Far from recovering from the aftershocks of World War I felt by the lost generation, Camus' generation would live through possibly the worst era ever in terms of politics. Fascism destroyed Europe. The totalitarian nature of Stalinism presented a crisis for many leftists, and liberal democracy was looking like it was really not going to make it there for a while. I think sometimes people forget just how bad things were looking. How does anyone come to support anything in an environment where everything seems to be fundamentally broken, where nothing's working? I think today, this generation also tends to think politics looks pretty bleak, absurd even, for people of all political persuasions. Many young leftists have become so browbeaten by the ongoing failure of a successful socialist movement to materialize. You don't hear, "We have nothing to lose but our chains, we have a world to win," quite so much anymore. One of the common things you hear them talk about these days is the capitalist realism thesis, that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. The politics of many young right-wingers seem to derive from being totally brain-broken and irony-poisoned by the internet. Imagine a guy feverishly rocking back and forth in his chair at 2 a.m. watching Sam Hyde or Fuentes on a big screen while simultaneously scrolling through a series of increasingly incomprehensible soy jack-related memes on their phone. Liberal triumphalism is totally dead. The people did not Pokemon go to the polls. And today, the feelings of young liberals are permanently stuck somewhere between constant fear and total panic. I was born in 2001. And I vaguely remember Bush being president, but obviously it's Obama that really sticks with me as the president of my childhood, so to speak. It's funny, the thing that stands out to me about Obama these days is that he was basically a normal, capable guy. Obama was a really interesting level-setting period for me in terms of my politics, and I think this is probably the case for a lot of people my age. In hindsight, yes, he was young, but I didn't think of him as young. He was still old to me when I was 10. And I didn't really have any conception of how old a president was supposed to be. He was a good speaker. He could make a point clearly, even if you disagreed with him. I didn't have any recollection at that time of a less charismatic president. This is just how I thought the president was supposed to be. Then came 2015, and the man who has defined politics in this country for the last decade came down the golden escalator. He's not well-spoken. He's old. He did not seem capable to me. He did not match the image of a president that I had in my mind. He was basically worse in every conceivable way. Donald Trump, to me, felt like one of those AI-generated one weird trick to reduce belly fat scam diet ads you occasionally see. You know somebody must be clicking on it if the company running this scam is spending money to place the ad, but you cannot understand how anyone in their right mind would actually click on this. So it's not just that he was a bad president. He was a nonsense president. He did not comport with what I thought politics was. He was a weird buffoon. This obviously felt like a downgrade. After Trump, we had Biden, who I voted for, irrelevant in a state like Texas, but I voted for him. Can I say that I was particularly excited about this, though? No, I can't. He was not a particularly exciting candidate, even then. He was unable to make something other than Donald Trump the focus of American politics, even after the 2020 election conspiracies, even after January 6th, even after all the insane stuff over the next 4 years. He just couldn't do it. It felt like two old men fighting. That's because it was. It wasn't inspiring. It felt like further deterioration. Now we have Trump again. Politics is deteriorating further. Trump officials are wearing Mao-style badges of Trump's face. He's flouting the law. He's clearly being puppeteered around by a gaggle of scheming advisors constantly fighting each other for influence and clout within the administration and the broader MAGA movement. The broad theme here, I think, is that politics feels like it's basically gotten worse, and more than worse, more absurd for my entire life. I don't think anything captures this point better than the fact that today, Our prominent political and cultural commentators are all stand-up comedians. Is there anyone better positioned to capitalize on a zeitgeist of absurdity and disillusionment than a comedian? This generation does feel a little bit like we just missed it. We were born just too late to pay for college ourselves without a ton of debt. We just missed a world where being online wasn't mandatory. We just missed politics that wasn't defined by one of the dumbest people you could ever conceive of to define politics around. We have vague memories of the last years before this was all the case. Our parents remember a time before this was the case. All the media we consumed growing up presumed a world where this was not the case, and yet it is. I have to think that this tension will be different for the generation younger than us. They will grow up with an expectation of online dating, online friends, and online work rather than adapting to it, just as an example. Will they be upset about this, or will it not even cross their minds that it could have been different? The issues they face and the solutions that make sense to them will be different than what makes sense to us, but undoubtedly they will find something to be angsty about, just as we have, just as every generation before us has. My parents' generation, Generation X, just going off the types of media they made popular, seems to have been frustrated with middle-class conformity and commercialism, for example. It's important to have some perspective about this, actually, I think. Objectively, we do not have it as bad as the people who lived through the world wars. We just don't. But we can still feel bad. The feelings we're dealing with as a generation are not new. Aimlessness, alienation from the modern world, politics, and an economy that either doesn't make sense or doesn't deliver what we expect. These are old feelings. And we can learn a lot from the people who recorded their reactions to them when they felt them, even if the circumstances are wildly different. It's important to remember that you can never go back. The nostalgia you have for the past is probably lying to you about how things actually were. But it's equally important to remember that we can make things better. Individually, we can make things better for ourselves, and we can work to make the world better. That's a core belief that I just refuse to let go of. And the data I have here shows that a lot of people my age must agree. 76% of Gen Z, in spite of it all, in spite of the culture, the economy, the politics, and all the bad feelings that we bury under who knows how many layers of irony, in spite of it all, 76% of Gen Z still feels optimistic about the future, and 82% of us are still confident that we'll achieve our goals someday. We are all going to make it. It's as possible for us today as it was for the people who rebuilt the world after the world wars. We have an obligation, if not to anyone else, then to ourselves, I think, at least to try. In the words of Hemingway, the world is a fine place and worth fighting for. See you next time. Thanks so much for making it to the end. Old school Ryan heads will know that this is the type of video that I used to make more when I first started making videos. So this has been an interesting and kind of fun one for me. Thank you again so much for making it. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share with a friend if you think they might like it. Okay, I'll see you next time.